Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. I'm your host, Manoj Tandon, and today we are honored to have Sean Sweeney join us. Sean is a very special guest. He's a frequent author and speaker on the subject of cybersecurity. He currently leads the field CISO and Cloud Security Advisor Group within Oracle North America Cloud Engineering. Sean joined Oracle from Microsoft, where he was the Global Chief Security Advisor. He has held the CISO position at the University of Pittsburgh. He's been the CTO of a legal technology and e-discovery startup, CIO of a national law firm, and litigation support applications manager for the U.S. Department of Justice. He's got an illustrious resume, a lot of knowledge, and he started his career as a database administrator for ExxonMobil. So he's come a long way since then. And he's in Pittsburgh, so we're kind of partial to him in that way. But in his current role, at Oracle, he and his team focus on advising customer CISOs on security and compliance issues related to the cloud. And boy, that is a big topic, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is cybersecurity in the cloud and compliance. And it's a subject that is near and dear to a lot of people, and hopefully you can, Sean, shed a lot more light on it than others can.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you for being here. So I got to ask, how did you go from database admin to cybersecurity? I mean, that's a jump, man.
You know, right? Well, this is the part of the podcast where I'm supposed to lie to the audience and say that I planned it all out.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you look at my resume, it actually does. There's some rhyme or reason to it. You know, I started as a DBA, or at least there looks to be rhyme or reason. I started as a DBA at ExxonMobil, and then moved to the Department of the Interior, which actually regulated ExxonMobil to a certain extent. And then I moved over to the Justice Department. That Department of the Interior was their customer or client. You know, the reality is look, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I was actually have a humanities degree, so I have an undergrad in history, and did my graduate work in education. But I grew up in a house where technology was prevalent. Both my parents were network engineers. My mom for the Army, my dad for some intelligence agencies, we'll say. And so I swore I would never do it, but I got into technology. I loved it. My humanities degree actually served me well, since I spent a lot of my day communicating, both in writing and orally. But you know, I saw the industry grow, right? You know, back when I started in 2000, you know, and even heck, when I took over security at the University of Pittsburgh in 2012, cybersecurity was still somewhat in its infancy, right? It was still very much a network-focused occupation.
Yep.
Some 80% of the people on my team at Pitt had network security in their title. But you know, I had the pleasure of working in different size organizations in different parts of the technology stack, but always those parts that were the intersection of IT and the actual users and the business units, right? And that's really where cybersecurity can do its best work, really in terms of enabling the businesses that they support. So it just, you know, by happenstance, I learned all the skills I needed to eventually become a successful CISO, and then, you know, move on to Microsoft and now Oracle, where I can, you know, share that work with others. You know, specifically. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought, please.
No, and I was going to say, you know, how did I specifically make the jump from? Because you see in my resume, I went from kind of the legal world to over to the university to run their security program. For those that were in and around Pittsburgh in 2011, they would have known that the university was under a number of threats, specifically bomb threats from a foreign actor that actually shut the university down during the weeks leading up to and including finals week.
Wow.
The then U.S. Attorney, David Hickton, activated the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and to help address these threats at Pitt. When I was CIO of a firm called Burns, White and Hickton.
Okay.
So David and I had a relationship. I helped Dave in the U.S. Attorney's Office with that case, and that's what really ultimately led for my transition into the university, which is just a great story. And it was the beginning of Dave Hickton getting the Justice Department at a national level really into the business of prosecuting cyber criminals, right? And he had a long history of that, including the Chinese and the Russians and others, which is now the policy of our Justice Department going forward.
Well, you know
So
what,
pretty cool.
and I have a lot of questions on that. We're going to get to that specifically here.
Okay.
But that's a wonderful story at multiple levels, because one of the things that you'll see, and for our listeners, if you go back to past episodes and watch, you'll see the diversity of backgrounds that CISOs and cybersecurity professionals come from. And we do a lot of support with the veterans community. We hire a lot of veterans. We support them and making the transitions from military to civilian life. And I don't think anyone should exclude themselves from a career in security. If they are genuinely looking to do it, there's an avenue by which it can be pursued. It's not confined to being a computer science major and coming from that background.
That's so true. That's so true. We have so many slots open. We need diverse skill sets and mindsets. There is a place for everyone under this tent that is cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
And there's very few cybersecurity professionals that have really, really good people skills. And I think as we look at cybersecurity programs develop, that's a key element of it, because engaging the broader population in an organization in defending the organization is a key part of cyber. And you have to have some skills to get people on that track.
Absolutely. The future of cyber isn't in how good we are at operating the nerd knobs of the technology. It's how good we are at translating cyber risk into a language that the businesses we support can understand. That's where the rubber meets the road.
You know what? You just gave us the title of this episode. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That's what we're going to begin with. So let's start with the cloud. This is a big topic. Everyone has a cloud first initiative, and then they're talking, and especially now with COVID and remote work, a lot of organizations that were on the bench with it are no longer on the bench with it. They were forced to make certain decisions. But there is a difference between being in the cloud and being on the cloud. And there's a shared responsibility in cybersecurity. Can you help? There's a myth out there that if I am just subscribing to cloud-based services, it's all secure. I don't have to. What do I have to worry about? Help us break that down a little bit here.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a point of confusion for many out there. And it doesn't help that, there are multiple flavors of cloud, right? And so it can be confusing. So let me sum it up and make it kind of easy for everyone. Okay. No matter what flavor of cloud you as a customer are using, whether you're using software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, right? There are three things that you are always going to be responsible for. Okay. And first is the security around the users that you are bringing to bear in that cloud. Okay. Now that cloud provider may provide you tooling to help with that, but those identities are your responsibility. The second thing is the security of the devices that you are connecting to that cloud. Okay. That is always your responsibility, regardless of what flavor. And then the last is the security around the data that you use in that cloud. Now, that one's a little more confusing. I need to put a little asterisk next to it, because that cloud service is obviously going to have things like, or should have things like encryption in place.
Right.
But the cloud service itself isn't going to know your crown jewels from your cookie recipes, right? And so you as a customer are going to be responsible for wrapping extra layers of security around your most important information. Okay. So that holds true in all three flavors, or three common flavors of public cloud. Where you can start to wrap your mind around, all right, beyond that, what's the difference from a security model from SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS? And I have an analogy I like to use. And it starts with actually on-prem.
Okay.
On-prem is your house. And when you own a house, you're responsible for everything, right?
Yep.
You're responsible for the yard. You're responsible for the picket fence around it. You're responsible for the four walls of your house, the roof, all the electricals inside, everything, right? As you move from on-prem to infrastructure as a service, which is where you're peeling off the first levels of or layers and providing them over to the cloud security provider, specifically those around the physical layer, the data center,
Sure.
the physical networking, the physical hardware. Think of that as an apartment,
Okay.
right? You are the building is provided to you, the front door and the walkways and the mailboxes is all provided, the hallways. And when you get into your apartment, though, everything is up to you, right? You got to provide the furniture, hang the pictures on the walls, all that good stuff.
Yep.
That's infrastructure as a service. So you're just peeling off the initial layer to the service provider. The next layer is what we call platform as a service. These are things like Oracle's autonomous database offering or Microsoft SQL platform service, right? This is where they're providing both the underlying infrastructure, physical infrastructure, as well as some of the application plumbing, right?
Okay.
And to me, that's more like a furnished apartment, right? So I've it's still that same model, but I'm giving even more responsibility over to the cloud service provider. The last piece, software as a service, is like the hotel, right? You just kind of show up. You decide what you want to put on TV. You got to throw some clothes in the drawer and keep yourself showered, but everything else around you is taken care of. And those are kind of good analogies because ultimately, in all three of those models, the cloud service provider is essentially patrolling the hallways of those buildings, and it's going to leave you to do inside your apartment or your hotel room what you see fit, unless what you're doing in your apartment or your hotel room kind of spills out into the
Yeah.
hallway and starts to impact the other guests, right? So that's how I like to think about cloud, and that's how I like to think about cloud responsibility.
That's a very good analogy because in all three of those cases, who knocks on your door and who you let in is completely up to you, right? So getting back to securing the identity, that's yours to contend with, right?
Yeah.
And and if you're leaving your data open in your hotel room and somebody walks in and the cleaning service picks it up, well, that's on you. You should have put it in the safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. And it is a big mind shift, because we, like I mentioned when we kind of did the introduction there, security grew out of the network control plane because that was the control plane that security could glom onto. And so if you had, a security problem, it started with firewalls and IDS and IPS. And if you had a data problem, you got a network-based DLP appliance. Like it was all network centric, but the world of the digital estate that we're helping to secure lives outside the four walls of our network. And so the network heavy approaches aren't as useful, and the identity heavy approaches become that much more important in cloud, namely because those interfaces are largely open to the internet, right? Because of the nature of cloud.
Absolutely. The perimeter, the traditional perimeter has been completely obliterated, right? Everything, it used to be behind our firewall and we're controlling that entire experience. Now the perimeter is out there and it's not completely in our control, but it doesn't alleviate the responsibility of securing that information. So for example, let's say you're using Box, Dropbox, or using Microsoft's shared drive, whatever it may be. If your data, if your intellectual property gets exfiltrated from those environments, from what I have seen in the contract language on all three, those cloud providers are not responsible for your IP.
Right, because it lives in, generally speaking, because it lives in the security of that data lives in your area of responsibility, right? Now, if that data were compromised through some failure of the cloud service provider's obligations on their end, right? It was compromised at a service level. That would be a different story. But that's not what we're seeing out there. What we see out there is that customer tendencies get popped by bad actors because of poor configuration, whether that be in terms of kind of identity and access management, or in terms of information protection. So either not not gating it properly, or not having the right protections around the information, so that way they're properly protected.
Yeah, not having.
And really the secret sauce is the combination of the two, plus layering on a proper kind of threat detection strategy to monitor it all.
Yep. And I would imagine putting in some kind of DLP or CASB is a part of that equation as well if you're worried about exfiltration of information.
Absolutely.
Right. So there's the zero trust and SASE are two terms that are thrown out there quite often. If you could enlighten our listeners a little bit, what's the difference between the two? Is this just like a Forrester Gartner thing, or is there is there a substantial difference here? What's
there is and there isn't, right? So yes, I mean, zero trust is championed by Forrester, specifically by Chase Cunningham, a great guy over at Forrester. SASE is a reboot of an older concept from out of Gartner. They both are trying to address the same thing, though, right? And essentially, it's the problem set that we've been talking about, right? It's this digital estate that expands outside the network perimeter. And that really brings the data to the users where they are on whatever devices they want to be using, right? And this is the modern working environment that security professionals find themselves in today. I'd say the big differentiator between the two is zero trust tends to focus less so on network-based controls, certainly network companies will have an offering of a zero trust flavor, but identity plays a lot keyer in there. Controlling all the pieces of the puzzle, so the endpoint, the users that are accessing those endpoints and the cloud services, the telemetry around both devices and the users and their health, feeding into what data they're trying to access, what level they need to have assurance of both identity and device health to access any given resource is much more important in that zero trust model. SASE focuses, zero trust to a SASE person is a subset, right?
okay.
They say zero trust is important to do, but the other thing we need to do is we need to extend the network out to the users. So SASE is both about security and using a lot more network-based security controls, because SASE is also about connectivity, right? And making sure that those users have adequate bandwidth to be running these applications remotely, right? And so if you're focused on that in the SASE world, then it makes much more sense to also include a lot of your security controls to be around the network, because you've taken care to extend that network all the way to the users. Whereas a zero trust model would say, I don't care what network you use, open internet, that's fine, because I'm controlling the endpoint, I'm controlling the device, I'm controlling the data that they're getting to, I can make sure the tunnel in between is secure. I don't think that, all that said, I don't think companies need to get too worried about, are we a SASE shop or are we a zero trust shop, right? Because
Thank you for going
ultimately,
there.
both of them are security strategies to tackle this modern world. So take what works for your organization, and use that, right? And don't get just caught up in the lingo, and also challenge your vendors too, right? Zero trust has had a little more time in market. I remember before RSA shut down, not shut down,
Yeah.
but before it went all virtual, and I was at RSA when Corona first came into the U.S. Back in 2020, it would have been. But zero trust. Every vendor on the floor was all about zero trust, right? If when we go back in person, whenever that happens to be, you're going to see a lot more SASE there. So it is gaining traction, and so I think you will hear more about that, and the vendors that have traditionally spoken in a zero trust or through a zero trust lens will now also start complementing that with a kind of a SASE talk track or in reference architectures as well.
Okay. So from a company, and see, a lot of our listeners, there's a lot of small businesses. And when I say small businesses, those employees, those organizations that have less than 2,000 employees. Okay. When they are trying to implement SASE or zero trust, if you read all the literature on it, there's no way they can implement every single darn thing that's part of it. It would be cost prohibitive to do. What are some of the fundamentals that you would
Yeah.
suggest to these organizations to prioritize tackling first?
Yeah, it is all about, it starts with identity health. That's thing number one. If you don't have your identity estate in order, and what I mean by that for these organizations is that if you don't have a, what we would have called like 10 years ago, a single sign-on strategy, you really need to start there,
Okay.
because in this cloud world, identity is the perimeter, and identity is key, right? So that's and for a zero trust strategy, identity is what you're building on. So that's thing number one. Part of that thing number one is, making sure that not only is your organization using a single identity to authenticate to the myriad of services that your users use, both on-prem and in the cloud, but that you're also wrapping levels of assurance around those identities. So using things like multi-factor, whether you use it in an always-on fashion or you use it in a more risk-based approach, either way, it needs to be part of your strategy, right? And so that's key, and that is thing number one.
Okay.
Once I've worked on that, or while I'm working on that, the second thing that's going to be super important is device health.
Okay.
Okay, and because we live in this distributed work world now
Yep.
because of COVID, and that cat is not going back in the bag,
That's
right?
right. It's not.
Even when workers
Nope.
return to the office, they're going to demand that fifth day a week from home, or they're going to demand to go to grandma's house in Tennessee and be able to work there that week. And the flexibility they have now is not going to go away. So we need to make sure that we can ensure the trustworthiness of the devices they're connecting from, and or limit what they have access to based on the device they're coming from,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Managed versus unmanaged. So that's where you focus number two. Okay.
Okay.
Once you've gotten those two things done, then you can start adding on number three, which is really more robustness around your data protection strategies.
Okay.
Okay. That's not to say I don't care about data protection while I'm doing one and two. It's just I've got to I've got to walk before I can run, right? And so those would be the order I would focus on. And what data protection looks like is things like data classification, things like data masking, data protection above and beyond standard encryption at rest and in transit, right?
Okay.
To me, those are just table stakes and a given.
Right.
And I assumed those all along.
That's fantastic practical advice. And all you folks listening out there, go back and evaluate your organizations against what Sean just said, because it's critical, and those are the foundations of building a fantastic cybersecurity program. One thing in this arena of managing identities, especially with BYOD becoming as prevalent as it has, is what is the role of MDM, or do you see pushback in the CISOs that you consult with, their organizations? Do they encounter pushback in deploying MDM on BYOD devices? Because the end user is giving over personal control of what is an asset owned by them to the company that they work
Yeah,
for.
yeah. You know, the first thing I'll say, and I'll steal a line from Brett, who was the CISO of my previous organization, the CISO at Microsoft, and he used to always say, "I don't even have enough time to read my own email, let alone yours." Right?
Right.
And the kind of flippant comment there, the point is that the organization's interest isn't in looking at pictures on your phone. The organization's interest is protecting corporate assets that also reside on that phone. And so for organizations that determine that MDM is the way that they're going to do that, what's key for them is make sure that they have the proper policies and related procedures in place to protect personal information that also lives on those devices, right? And so how do you define corporate versus personal information, and how will that personal information not be used in the corporate environment, and what will occur on that personal device if there is compromise, right? AKA that whole device potentially gets wiped, and that personal information is lost. So that's thing number one around MDM. The other thing is that organizations can evaluate strategies that don't include full-blown MDM,
Okay.
right? There is technology known as mobile application management, which containerizes corporate information in specific applications on the device based on the
Yeah.
user's identity, so they can actually have both personal and private information in the same app. I'm talking your email apps and your productivity apps. And for some organizations, that protection is enough um, for those BYOD scenarios, right? And therefore limits kind of the spread of that corporate information to only those areas that is protected. Note that I'm not talking about containerization, which is kind of older technology. I'm talking more about either going full blown MDM or kind of meet in the middle with mobile application management. And those are the two prevalent choices that organizations have. What I found from a user perspective, though, is if you clearly outline what protections my personal information has, even if you're managing my device,
Okay.
aka you're not going to use my browser history against me in the workplace, and I understand what benefit I get by wiring up that personal device, aka flexibility and the ability to work remotely from a single device and not have to carry around two. Then most organizations, I mean, most users in organizations are gonna make that choice and be like, yeah, this is what I need to do to get my job done, right? So
Well, it opens up a can of worms from a compliance perspective, right? So whether you're writing
mhm,
policies for your SOC 2 or high trust or HIPAA or the case may be, when you introduce personal devices in, it's a big can of worms. I really like what you're suggesting with mobile application management because it avoids some of the sticky topics that occur. We see like a typical use case we see a lot in healthcare is with, it's not supposed to be, but oftentimes there might be patient information that is sent to a physician and it lands on their
mhm,
personal phone. Like with radiology, you see it all the
absolutely.
time. X-rays or MRIs can go on the radiologist's phone and they can look at it and they can respond, which is great because the time to respond goes way down and the quality of service goes up. But then there's the data is sitting on someone's personal device,
Yep, yep.
and it could.
Yeah, well, and that's that brings up a second point that's I think related, right? So where it starts is at an organizational level that the organization has to think, what are the risks I'm trying to protect against, and they need to remember that too much friction is also a risk, right? Because let's go back to those physicians. I remember being and I won't name the hospital, but I remember being in a hospital looking over the shoulder of a physician who was using his personal phone to take picture of information on his work-based phone to text it to another physician because it was just too cumbersome and
Yeah.
complicated to use the quote unquote secure systems on that corporate device, right?
Yep.
Users are like water. They will find the path of least resistance to get their job done. They're not trying to be a pain. They're just trying to get their job done. They're not security people, right? So it's our job as security people to give them pathways to get it done and get it done securely at the same time, right? And so that takes an organization understanding, what is the important information, how do our users work with it, and how do we facilitate those avenues with a strategy that allows us to balance, um, our compliance obligations, our security obligations, and the productivity obligations that we have to our workforce.
That right there was worth the price of admission. I hope our listeners here, especially 20% of our customer base is from healthcare, that those who
Okay.
listened in heard that advice, and that's just solid. One thing that we say in conjunction with that is oftentimes, Sean, what we have found is in the case of the physician, I bet no one from their security teams actually sat down with those people and explained the why behind things. And by and large, that's where we see the wheels fall off the bus. A lot of people are very reasonable. If you explain to them the why behind a policy, why something, and it can't just be, well, it's not in HIPAA compliance. And I can tell you that's going to be the story of water following the path of least resistance. But if they are genuinely told the realities of the risk that it presents, then people are generally reasonable. They're apt to follow. directions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say to that point, and let's stick with healthcare as the example. If you want to make it real for a physician or any clinician, right, nurses, all of them as well, um, bring it back to patient safety. Explain to that person why what they're doing could impact patient safety in terms of the confidentiality of their information, in terms of the integrity of that information,
Yeah.
or even the availability, right? Because we live in a day of ransomware, of that information. That's going to hit home with that clinician. The other thing, though, that, and this is on the security departments, you said, I bet they never sat down and explained to that physician why it was important.
Yep.
What I also bet they haven't done is sat down with that physician to understand what they do on a daily basis, and why quick and immediate access to these records is also important to them. It's a two-way street, right? We need to make sure we fully, as security professionals, we fully understand the businesses that we are trying to enable with security.
And that, sir, is the business side of security. It's the human side of security, and it's something that I give our industry pretty low grades on in general. That's just my opinion. It's not my company's opinion, but it's my personal opinion from what I've seen. That we just don't. We're often turning knobs in a dark room somewhere, and that's what people see as cybersecurity, and it's a people problem.
Yeah,
it's a business problem.
It is a people problem, and I think the other problem there too is that we as security professionals take on a level of ownership of the problem that I don't think many understand and appreciate. And that burden of keeping your organization secure um, is a big one, right? And so it tends to turn us into Dr. No, right?
Yeah.
Or the team that put the no in technology,
Yeah.
right? Because we just become so darn risk averse. But what we forget when we do that is that the burden of the security of our organization doesn't actually live on our shoulders. It actually lives on the business's shoulders. It's our job to consult with the business, advise them of that risk, and allow them to accept, mitigate, transfer, all the things that you can do with risk. Ultimately, that's cybersecurity's job. And the risk that they choose to mitigate, we may implement and run those tools as well, depending on the governance structure of your security org. But that's our role. Our role isn't just to carry that weight on our shoulders day in and day out. And I think that's important to remember.
So, Sean, let me ask you a question here. In terms of structures of our security teams, do you think it would make sense to pull the CISO out underneath this from the CIO and put them in a separate, totally parallel lane? And I'll tell you, and for our listeners, I'll just say it. I think that there's a conflict of interest there, because someone that's paying your paycheck and you are called on to critique the environment that they are responsible for, I think becomes a very heavy lift in some instances. So that's mine, but I'd love to get someone your opinion, who knows a lot more about this topic than I do.
And I've seen it done a lot of different ways. And so therefore I do have to give the consulting answer of it depends.
Okay.
But I'll tell you why I say that.
Okay.
So it depends on the maturity of the organization.
Okay.
And it also depends on what it is that the CISO's office is going to do.
Okay.
So if you are going to both be a governance organization and an operational organization, it often makes sense for the CISO to still report in under the CIO for the economies of scale of systems that the CISO is using, right? Because they're riding on that CIO. They're both creating the rules and enforcing the rules at the same time, right? And what I've seen in organizations where the CISO has that operational responsibility and reports separately from the CIO's office is that you have a buildup of duplicative technology in both stacks, right? Now, in an ideal world, if that CIO and CISO could work together, kumbaya, hand in hand, that wouldn't happen. And so that reporting structure of them being peers would work. But in reality, you end up with two competing technology organizations. And so you can end up with competing spend. That's the downside. Now, If you are a governance only CISO and then you're relying on the CIO's team to implement, then it absolutely, you have to be a peer of the CISO in somewhere else reporting, in the org, whether it's reporting in through legal, reporting in through risk, which is where, in FinServ, where a lot of CISOs report into. Then it makes a lot more sense, and you can still have some monitoring function, but just not necessarily the enforcement functions in the CISO's office. And so for those organizations, I see that separate reporting structure is super important. Ultimately, it's about organizations looking at what they're trying to accomplish, what's the current structure and what's the ideal structure, and kind of road mapping out where they want to go. But the CIO and the CISO have to do it together, whether they one reports into the other or their peers. When I was at Pitt, the CIO, she was my boss um, from a performance review
Okay.
perspective. But when it came to matters of security, we very much had the understanding that it couldn't be the fox guarding the henhouse, and that I had to have the authority to step out and contradict her or her own team, my other peers, in matters of security. So in that respect, at that leadership table, I was separate, right? I was the only one that had a C in addition to the CIO,
But
right, at that leadership table. And that was an important distinction to make for our organization to propel the security of the university forward.
But you know what? That's a cultural thing too. If the company's culture is set
Yeah.
up to where they will permit such a discourse, I know in a lot of organizations that just may not be the case, where you cannot
Yeah.
contradict. That's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
And I see it a lot actually more on cloud, where I see the person who's in charge of cloud security is also in charge of like the DevOps team. And I'm like, whoa, that's a huge conflict of interest, right? The speed at which we roll things out and the way in which we secure them is on the same hat, right? That, it's one, if that person is monitoring the security, it's two, if they're setting the security policy as well. That's where you can get yourself into trouble.
So let's talk about, since you brought up cloud, let's circle back to that and hit
Yeah.
on multi-cloud and hybrid cloud,
Yeah.
and how do you secure a multi-cloud hybrid cloud environment?
Right.
Give us some
Right.
thoughts there.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is that every organization I talk to, almost every organization says they have a multi-cloud strategy. In reality, uh, um, you know, they tend to have a primary IaaS and PaaS provider, and then a bunch of SaaS services, right? That's what
Okay.
they mean by multi-cloud. That's not actually multi-cloud, right?
Okay.
That's all your eggs in one basket, plus some SaaS, right? Um, so and so what I spend a lot of time now doing is how do you operationalize a true multi-cloud where you have two or three or four tier one cloud providers, public cloud providers in your portfolio, and you're leveraging those cloud assets, and those cloud providers for their various strengths, right? What that takes from a security perspective is ensuring that that cloud provider is going to work with you to tell you what are the pipes that you need to plumb to securely operate their environment.
Okay.
Okay. And that is incumbent on the cloud provider to help you do that. And I don't see it happening as often as it should. Also, ideally, depending on the investment that you're making in that public cloud provider, they should be helping you do some level of that work as well, right? Where I am today, we work with customers in a maturity acceleration program
Okay.
where we help customers do 11 key steps toward cloud maturity with our own cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Things like, ensuring that they're using centralized identity and they've got their IAM roles defined, ensuring that their SIM is wired up, regardless of what SIM they're working with. And steps like that, ensuring that Fast Connect or the network is extended in a secure way down to their on-prem hybrid environment. So going through all those steps with them. So that way, step one is ensuring that you're secure in the cloud, that you're, cloud number one, right?
Right.
And you need to do that across all of your clouds, right? And then the challenge becomes, how do you normalize all that information, right? And quite frankly, I've seen different organizations do it different ways, right? If you choose to normalize that information by just consuming all the dashboards directly from each cloud provider as they provide them, then what you're going to end up with is a security team that specializes in each individual cloud,
Yes.
right?
That's
And that
expensive.
often, that is super expensive.
That is
That is
very
super
expensive,
expensive.
but okay.
Yes. And so what we advocate is not necessarily going that route, but let's use the tooling, the native tooling from the cloud providers, and plumb that into a common set of tools that your organization is using to manage its hybrid environment, right? And so oftentimes that will be your SIM and your SOAR.
Yep.
So to do just not incident and event management, but also orchestration and automation on top of that. To provide those initial layers, and also working to ensure that at the endpoint, whether you're talking endpoint connecting to the cloud or endpoint running in the cloud, that you have a common set of visibility there as well. And so that way you can, in essence, manage your clouds from a single pane of glass. But to do that means you have to do all that plumbing work, right? And have your cloud provider help you with that plumbing work, because the complexity in cloud is from a conceptual level, all the clouds kind of operate the same, but from a in practice and a nomenclature perspective, I at Oracle could be talking about something with one of my colleagues from Microsoft, and we're talking about the same thing, but we call it two different
Sure.
things. We're in the industry, so we're used to translating, but our customers aren't, right? And so they rely on each individual cloud provider to help them with that nomenclature and help them understand what that security best practice is. Sadly, what often ends up happening when customers are trying to go after these multi-cloud strategies is a cloud provider may give them a whole bunch of tools, but not instructions on how to use them,
Yeah.
right? And if that's the case, then what I would advise those customers to do is work with a good partner that can show you how to use that toolbox, right? Or how to take all those Legos and build a damn house,
That's right.
as opposed to just have a bunch of Legos.
Yeah. We see that
Ideally, I want the
so
cloud
often.
provider to.
We see
Yeah.
that all the
Yeah.
time. That they drop them. The tools are dropped off at the shipping dock in the back, and now people are trying to figure out what to do with it, and it's a real problem. It's
Yeah. It really is. It really is. And more and more I see, I know it's our strategy at Oracle is to not just provide the security, but provide prescriptive security for customers and provide programs that help wire customers up with our Accelerator program for maturity. But at the end of the day, it's really the customer needs to um, install the plumbing and then monitor accordingly, right?
yeah. And so let me ask you, on the Accelerator program at Oracle, is this
Mhm.
something that is offered as a standard offering with every cloud service that you bring to your customers, or is this something specialized that's part of the implementation team? Just curious on.
Yeah, this is more on the implementation side. I mean, we certainly make so we start at a platform layer and ensuring that we have the security really baked into everything we do, all the way down to the hardware root of trust. And then in terms of our cloud services, it's not just you have the security option; it's that security option is on by default, right? So we try to protect the customers out of the box. The next layer is, okay, I'm building workloads. How do I do them securely, right? And so what we did is we worked with Center for Internet Security to come up with benchmarks for OCI, and then turn those benchmarks into landing zones, right? So customers can organize their architectures against these landing zones, and actually use them to build out a secure architecture. We just launched actually this week V2 of that OCI landing zone based on those CIS benchmarks.
Oh,
For some customers, we then take it a step further, and we'll actually bring in my team as field CISOs to advise them on their maturity against our own programs, but also anything related to our cloud. But specifically to that maturity program, what we'll do with those customers is in many cases we'll bring the resources to bear to um, uh, help them plumb their SIM as an example, or help them deploy Fast Connect. Our level of investment in customers in those scenarios is going to obviously be based on those customers' level of investment in us. And so it's a bit of a give and take, because we're making investment there, but we feel strongly that investment is important, because our customers using our platform securely is key to the future of customers using our platform, right? Customers, when there's a blip in the news related to security, I can look at it and understand, like, oh, that was on the customer side of the cloud responsibility matrix, right? The customer doesn't care as much about that.
No, they don't.
Right?
They just know they got hit.
They just know their house is on fire, or their apartment or their hotel room is on fire, and they want help, right? And so we try to prevent the fire from happening in the first place. But when they do break out, we want to limit the blast radius.
Exactly.
And so that's what our programs really focus on.
So let's talk about ransomware, because that is part of creating this blast radius. So, and it's been in the news all over the place, and I hear a lot of people in Washington give a lot of useless information about it. But I think, though, at a policy level, is there things that in your mind could be done? Is there a legislative solution to this, really?
I think there can be. Here's what needs to happen. So the thing that's important to understand about the ransomware that we're seeing today, I tend to refer to it as human-operated ransomware. Okay. Yep. Because it differs from the CryptoLocker days, which was really kind of spray and pray ransomware, right? That was limited to single machines or single systems.
Right.
What we have today is determined adversaries using advanced persistent threat techniques to get into organizations, locate crown jewels, lay in wait, and execute their mission, encryption, at an opportune time in order to force a specific outcome. And that specific outcome is payment. Okay, it's a business model.
It's cash. That's a good thing, because
the intent.
That is a good
thing in the sense that
you know the intent.
You know the intent, and even though they're using what I call advanced persistent techniques, they're using like whole sides of buildings are missing that they're walking in through, right?
Absolutely.
One of the most common ways that these actors are getting in is through unsecured RDP and SSH ports open to the internet, right? Like what? Or using known vulnerabilities that have had patches out for 30 plus days to get into these organizations, right? And so where once they get into the organization, they're doing all kinds of complex and cool things to work stealthily. But from a prevention perspective, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit we can be doing from a hygiene perspective to help out with the issue, and force them on to other customers that are easier targets. Because again, they're a business model, so they're gonna go after lower hanging fruit every time. And so where a government can help is to help by coming up with a unified national standard in the case of the United States, as opposed to the state-by-state approach that we've seen to date. Now, that said, that unified national standard needs to focus on the lowest common denominator, needs to be simplified, needs to look more like something like the CIS's critical security controls, what used to be known formally as the SANS Top 20, right? Something like that needs to be put into place, as opposed to maybe something as big and lofty as GDPR. If we're really focused on solving the ransomware problem right now, that would do it. Establishing that baseline across the nation would really help to do it, and would give these organizations a roadmap of what they need to tackle. Because what I feel, and it's not just based on feeling, because it's what I've seen in talking with customers, is that for many of them, there's still like a lack of understanding of what the actual problem is, and how these bad actors are getting in, and they're equating SolarWinds, which was a nation state going after intelligence operations, with these ransomware, and the news isn't helping, because the news is like, well, Russia
they don't know.
It's like, well, cyber criminal versus nation state. Like, don't worry about that. Worry about the way these actors are actually getting into your organization, and it's through really stupid baseline hygiene stuff that they're generally getting in through the organization. Now, once you've shored up those, then you can start focusing on, because the other interesting things that they're doing is once they get in, they tend to turn off security controls to hide their movements, right?
Yep.
So next step in maturity after you've closed the front door and put a deadbolt on it is, okay, let's look at monitoring when my security controls get turned off. That should throw in an alert because that means there might be a bad guy traversing my network.
Sure.
So, there's certainly lots of other things we can do, but it really starts with the basics.
That's right. Change the default password on your Oracle databases. And I know there's listeners out there whose companies still have default passwords in there. So that's...
Oh, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It's those basics. And when it comes to nation state, it's something that I don't know that you're going to stop 5,000 PhDs who are working on ways to compromise a system. That's not a worry that is addressable quite easily, but doing the basic...
I would worry. Yeah, in a nation state example, it's more about detection than it is about protection.
That's right.
But for these ransomware scenarios, there is a strong protective strategy that can prevent many of the instances that we have seen before it even gets to our detective controls.
But you know what? We can't. A lot of companies struggle with the basics of vulnerability management, right? We don't. We can't seem to get that right. So and that's part of the basics.
Yeah, well, I take it back a step further. Back in 2019, at the RSA conference, they have this innovation sandbox award that happens the first couple days. In 2019, the winner of the innovation sandbox was an asset management company.
Really?
What does that tell you? That tells you that we're failing all the way at the most basics of knowing what assets we have, and this is where cloud comes in because if you want to take a very cynical view of cloud, there's one thing that cloud service providers are great at. We never fall down on telling you what assets you have because we charge you for those assets. Right.
So it's in our best interest to tell you what that is.
Yeah. And so your ability to see your assets and deploy security controls to those assets and understand when those security controls where that baseline deviates on those assets, it's so much simpler to do in cloud. You're able to do it at a scale that you could never do on-prem. So that's just another kind of feather in the cap for cloud. But yeah, it really is, the most basic stuff. At Microsoft, I worked on a project that's still ongoing with NIST and their National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence around, how do we help organizations move their patching strategy forward, right? How do we help solve a 20-year-old problem? Yes, it does start with a foundational asset management issue, but building on from there, it includes understanding the way modern patches work. We have this legacy mindset of, we need to test every patch in every environment 6 ways to Sunday before we can roll out. Patches aren't built the way they used to be. You don't hear about or see, these patches bricking systems like they used to do. Patches for critical security vulnerabilities, it shouldn't be a matter of the risk of, it should be a matter, the risk of the testing time versus the risk of exposure of the security vulnerability you're patching for needs to weigh into the equation. So a lot of these organizations really need to stop kicking the can down the road. The other issue, though, there is, let's face it, patch management, vulnerability management, asset management, it's not sexy.
No, it's
right?
not.
It's not managed detection and response. It's not SIM as a service offerings. It's not, it's hygiene, it's basics, but it's important. And it's what's going to get you popped, right? 9 times out of 10, it's what's going to get you popped if you don't do it right. So it needs to be invested in.
And, that's absolutely correct. And I hope people take heed to that. And really, vulnerability management, it's a key area, and it's one that people can work on. A lot of the tools are already there. It's just making the necessary efforts inside the organization to make it a very high priority and execute it well. So we are already at the hour, and I want to give you a chance to plug anything you'd like to, any appearances, talks, things that you're going to be doing, anything you'd like to let our audience know about, and please.
Now, I appreciate that. If this was a year ago, pre-COVID, we'd be talking about a lot more speaking appearances and things like that. But, I'm pretty heads down on the work that I'm doing over at Oracle and working with our customers and onboarding them to our cloud in a secure fashion. So, what I want to plug here is the advice that I'm kind of espousing, because it's the advice I live by, right? It's what I told my customers at Microsoft. It's what I tell my customers now at Oracle, and it's what we as a community need to be following. So to me, that's what's most important. I'll be sure to come back when my next book comes out, and we
Please.
can talk about some other
Would love
cool
to have
cyber
you.
topics, and I'll plug that at the time, right?
Absolutely. Would love to have you back then. That would be fantastic. Just last week we had Michelle Wucker on, who wrote "You Are What You Risk." She's a New York Times best-selling author.
Yeah.
And so, but put a book out there would be great to have you back here, Sean.
Love it. I will definitely do that.
And Sean, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. And if people want to reach out to you, is your LinkedIn profile the best place we should have them message you?
Yeah. You know what? We can. It's post production. We'll throw up the kind of the URL for that, and folks can reach out to me that way. That'd be the best starting point.
That's great. I'll put that in the show notes. We'll make sure it's there. And Sean, again, Thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation and great advice.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. I've enjoyed it. Looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Thank you.